Probably my biggest fear or paranoia right now is just what's my validity right now. The business was certainly my identity. In my business, it came down to gross profit, managing labor, and I used a term called CTO, contribution overhead.
How does those marketing departments in each department actually attain more of that dollar?
And we always like customers to shop hungry.
Oh, yes.
And we love male shoppers, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Especially hunters.
Hunters, oh, yeah.
And for me, being married to a mental health therapist was probably good.
Welcome back to Unfollow the Herd podcast. My mission is here to build a path for you to become the 1%. And by doing that, I'm interviewing part of the 1%. You should be able to gain insights and knowledge so you can unfollow the herd. Today, I have a small town kid that grew up in the Midwest that must have had big visions growing. He literally grew up living in a grocery store that his parents ran. He owned and operated multiple businesses, had multiple employees. We'll get into that even deeper because you had a lot of employees in rural areas, which is difficult. He's now exited most of his companies. He's probably made millions of dollars along the way. We're going to talk about that experience with him. He also finds time to compete in these ultimate bike races, which I find very interesting. We just were talking about it before this. Chuck Lindner, appreciate you having on, dude.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. All right. Let's just break it down. Like, what did you mean when you're growing up? You grew up in a grocery store, like actually.
I did, yes. So my parents, I guess they're one of the ultimate entrepreneurs. They both grew up in South Dakota, and they saw an opportunity in a small town that my mother grew up in. The town had about 500 people at that time in the 70s. And there was 3 grocery stores in that community. One of them had just closed, and that's the one they bought. So if you know anything about grocery stores today, you're lucky to have one in some communities, and even they're losing their stores today. Mm-hmm. So my parents had a vision to start a grocery store. Neither of them had any experience with that. My mother grew up on a farm, and my father actually grew up in a zoo. Literally, his dad was a zookeeper, so they were, naive, if we could say. So they buy this grocery store, and they had 2 employees themselves. And as my sister and I grew, we became part of that staff. But we took our naps and grew up in this grocery store. So a lot of good stories, and a lot of. I remember when the store would close at night, I had the old traditional roller skates. Not the inline, but the 4 wheels that are kind of like, your 2 axles like your car. And I would get to roller skate up and down the store aisles. So I literally grew up and spent my time. And yes, I was potty trained in a grocery store. And my parents loved to tell a story when I waddled to the till where my mother was checking out a customer with my pants below my knees saying, did I wipe good enough?
Holy crap. So I grew up in the construction industry, worked at a young age in the concrete field, but what are you doing as you're working there at 3, 4? Like
Absolutely. Yeah. Facing shelves, putting out stock. Back then there weren't things like bagged potatoes. So my sister and I would bag potatoes. We would globe eggs to see if there was something in them. So we knew they were safe to put out on the shelf. We would buy fresh eggs from farmers. So it was very manual. And then probably my I don't know if impactful, but bigger memories are going with my father. We also did custom cutting. It was a small town, small store. We did what we did, to make $1. And so we'd go out to the farmer's lot, and then we'd call cattle, and then we'd hang that beef, and then we'd end up, packaging beef after the store closed. So that's how I grew up.
So you literally were doing every part of I suppose back in the day, you just didn't have like you said, right. This wasn't commercialized yet.
Correct. Wrapping lettuce, bagging potatoes, bagging apples. I mean, it was all very manual. Separating bottles, because back then there was a deposit on bottles, and
yes,
one of my jobs. Absolutely.
Jeez. So okay, well, I got a lot of questions now. How does your parents? Okay, so they and this is a rural community. I don't even know. I'm trying to think. Our Dollar General just closed in our community of 1,100, and we're shocked as a town that we can't operate, we lose the amenity. But there's these 3 grocery stores. in a rural market, 500 people. So how did your parents ended up thinking they could take advantage of this and actually build something better than the other two?
I think ignorance was on their side.
They didn't really know.
No, they didn't. No, but they were hard workers. That wasn't a question. And my father had been in Vietnam, and my mother's hometown was a great small town. She had wonderful siblings and great parents. So I think they felt like they could do this, and it was wonderful. We moved, I think, 2 or 3 times to 2 or 3 different buildings before my parents built a brand new grocery store in this community, a brick grocery store. So not a small investment.
Wow.
They did a lot of the work themselves, a lot of family. I had an uncle that helped, I think, wire the store. And, they called in a lot of favors to set up shelving and things like that. But that grocery store just actually recently closed. In the town's down to about 200 people. And obviously we're more mobile today. And it's one of those communities, every time someone dies, it's probably one less person that will live there.
Oh, gotcha.
It's extremely rural, not on any main roads. So it's sad. But, my parents really, they learned a lot. I mean, they probably learned more in that experience that set them up for future success just by the way they started it. There wasn't an option, and every dollar mattered, right? I mean, I took it personal if my classmates' families shopped at the other grocery store in town, right? Yeah, that was a big deal. And
so you're out selling in school even.
Absolutely.
Come to the market. So what did they learn from those other two? Like, did they go and you secret shop them or
I think, yeah.
You had to be better, right?
You just
in that smaller market.
Right? Trying harder. I had one mentor in my life that said to me, retail, which is really what I do. We're not making goods.
Right.
We're really more of a service industry when it comes down to it. And trying harder, he told me. And, what does that mean? In my grocery stores always carried out groceries, and you don't see that happen. And it wasn't a question of, do you want us to take out your groceries? We automatically assumed we're going to take out your groceries, so we didn't ask. I called it the 2-bag rule. So if the customers had 2 or more bags, we didn't ask. We just took out the groceries.
Gotcha. That you do not see that anymore. And the only place I can think is the place that, like Happy Harry's, they walk your beer to your car. And I don't know any other place that does.
Same exact philosophy, 100%.
Okay.
And obviously that's intentional, right? I mean,
yes.
They are getting trained, and it's part of who they are, their culture. And it's awesome.
Yep.
Listening to an earlier podcast with you and your wife, and she criticizing you on your shoes on the first encounter was fun. And I go to a shoe store that still the first thing they do is they'll measure your feet. And that's something that used to happen as a kid. And you think about the shoe industry today when we're buying them online, and it's easy to do that. And this store automatically will measure your feet, and they're trying a little harder, right? That's what it's about. And I rarely leave there without buying a new pair of shoes, right? Just because you feel good about your purchase at a place like that.
Yeah, it is about the little things, because now the battle to that and why everything's getting simpler. Like now you pull up to Target and they load it in the back. You lose the touch points though, probably, of going into the store, right? Like
for sure, you definitely want. I mean, I look at convenience stores today, pay at the pump. And,
yes.
That's a convenience I enjoy, but man, obviously they want you inside to buy some snacks and beverages, right?
Right.
So what's the balance? I mean, if they didn't offer that, they would probably lose business. But if I think there's a convenience store chain down in the South called Buc-ee's, and it's about experience.
Okay.
They have fudge, they have all kinds of homemade beef jerky, but it's theater, and that's really retail can succeed, I think, today with some theater.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that's so if someone's listening to this and they're looking at a small business, I mean, find your competitive advantage. It's always going to take more labor, and labor's harder to find today than it ever has been, I think. You could probably tell me more in your career, but it's harder today.
It's hard
to find people that want to do that job, and but if you can go that extra and implement that into your culture, I think that's where you win as a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. And I always believe every problem has a solution, and just some solutions are more complex. So I always think of it as like a lock. How many combinations are to that lock to find that solution? And labor, people are going to work somewhere, but you have that opportunity to hire them. And in Warroad, Minnesota, where I live, we have a wonderful company called Marvin Windows and Doors. They employ more people than our town has population. So it's a very competitive market.
Yeah, right.
For staff. And, I believe our unemployment rate in our county is around 1%. So in a lot of places that would be considered negative unemployment, meaning some people that are working would be preferred not to work. So, to hire staff, it's obviously wages are important, but also the environment. And, the woe is me doesn't work real well because Chris Rock said it very well. And who cares less about your problems than you? Everybody. So nobody cares about your problems. So,
right.
Figure it out. And I've had some good mentors and some friends that are in business that, we deal with those same issues. And what are you doing? What am I doing? And it's kind of fun to figure out because when you have good employees, it makes my job a lot easier. I mean, that's awesome when they can do a job better than you could ever do it.
Right. Well, I think culture, retention, like what are you driving? And I'd imagine, I don't know, how many employees did you actually have a total underneath your?
Around 300.
So you
both part and full time.
Right. And you're in an industry where you can go anywhere else and go work something else.
Absolutely.
And so what would you do, mentally, or build the culture, engrave the managers? I don't know. You must have done something to help retain.
Yeah.
And did you find stuff that works, find stuff that doesn't work?
I would be careful about drinking your own Kool-Aid, but I think I provided a good working environment, an opportunity to grow. My managers, my store directors, who were really the leaders of the supermarkets that I owned, I empowered them to really, it was their supermarket. And one of my sign of a good employee is when they call the place they're working or the department they're working in their own. When they take ownership in it, no different than a customer. If they call it their store, I think you've succeeded. So if you can empower them and then reward them, I think I had a wonderful bonus program with my managers, and I made it very transparent, shared all of my numbers, and made that goal super achievable. In fact, when they didn't hit the goal, I felt I had a problem. So I wanted that goal achievable.
Yeah, I think the opportunity, the first thing you said is creating an opportunity, and then they all own their areas. I mean, if they all are doing and hitting those milestones and making them achievable, there's no reason the business shouldn't do well. But yeah, empowering others, giving them opportunity. I always feel like, even for myself, it's like anyone can work anywhere, but if I don't continually make opportunities, which are usually taking on more risks or buying other things. It's like, okay, I might buy this other grocery store. Well, then, I'm going to need to probably take some staff with me and create a new opportunity for someone else.
Exactly. And I think environment matters, just walking around your offices here. This is awesome. It looks beautiful. And, people want to be part of that environment. And I had bought a grocery store 15 years ago, 12 years ago. That was really, it lacked a lot of investment, and I knew that I needed to invest in that. So as I was looking at, how to make that environment better, always look for something innovative and fun. But it was crazy once we finished that project, and it was a big project, the number of new applicants that came in, really the same, culture and environment, but it was a new physical environment, really. And that does matter. When you do that, people see it in a different way and they want to be involved with it. If it's old and run down, that's not fun to really work in, and if it's outdated. So I think as an entrepreneur or a business owner, you do owe that to your staff also, to provide, something that they're proud of.
Yeah. Environment. Yeah. I love that one. 'Cause I think in the grocery store, any service world, like you can only compete, but if people enjoy coming to work.
Absolutely. And I think retail probably doesn't have it as hard as manufacturing, because who wants to go to a manufacturing plant?
Right.
And you're seeing, I think, in some of the coasts, and definitely I saw this happen at Marvin's, and I was able to be part of helping them redesign and reimagine one of their biggest break rooms. And it turned into this really cool, almost looked like a higher end restaurant.
Oh, really?
It had this cool common space and booths, and it wasn't that sterile break room, environment that you would imagine in a manufacturing place. So, they're more challenged than we are to attract employees. So, how are you innovative and, I've heard some crazy things, especially in California, like slides and, letting the dogs come to work. I mean, that's great if you can do that.
Yeah.
Make it fun.
Yeah, industrial would be difficult because they all kind of work on their own, and they're probably doing the same tasks, and that's all. Not that they aren't in a service industry, but they're communicating with people a little bit more, and
absolutely.
And that's awesome. What all types of businesses do you own? Because I know you own even more than the grocery stores.
So grocery stores. My parents, led me down that path, so they gave me the opportunity, I'll say, to buy my first store. I remember it well. They said, we're retiring, and here's the price. We'll basically co-sign a loan, and I always tell people I think my most expensive store was the one I bought from my parents. but also they gave me that opportunity, and I'm forever grateful. And I wouldn't have wanted it any other way because I had to put skin in the game, right?
Sure.
It wasn't them handing it over to me or gifting it to me over time. It was me and my sister really trying to figure it out. So that's how it started.
That's
one
awesome.
Grocery store that turned into a second grocery store in a very competitive environment. And we were able to grow that business and then sell that one. It did very well. And then I bought a liquor store, bought another grocery store, and built a dollar store as well. And
wow.
It's a super competitive environment. And
super competitive?
Yeah, with Dollar Generals, obviously.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And really one of our big issues with that business was just sourcing product and then trying to get it to Warroad, Minnesota. Economically was, freight was expensive on dollar goods. So, a lot of different businesses. And then my wife and I entered a partnership in a distillery. So we broadened our horizon a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably a little more fun one than the grocery store business.
Or sexy, yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What do you? So you had 4 stores, and then the liquor store.
I had 3 supermarkets. Ultimately,
Okay.
I had sold one.
Okay, got it.
Correct. 3 supermarkets and a liquor store. Yes, that's what I ended up eventually selling to one company, a local company here called Hugo's.
Hugo's, yeah. No, that's and I guess we'll just talk about. I mean, did you envision exiting one day? Did you build the business to exit one day?
Yeah, I mean, I think the dream and the hope is that your kids might have that interest.
For
sure. My wife is a mental health therapist and saw maybe the sacrifice and time put into that. So my wife is currently a college professor. Super proud of her. And we're definitely different. And my wife, although I would say she respected and certainly saw what that gave us as a family.
Yeah.
Didn't want our kids to feel forced into that. And we have a daughter that's a junior in college that's in biomed and drug development, so I doubt the grocery world is for her. And then our son is a little bit young, and he's 12, going on 13. So it's yet to be determined, but at the end of the day, I want him to be able to create his own path. And sometimes the best time to sell a business is maybe when you have a buyer. And I'm a big proponent. I'm sure we'll talk more about getting out of your comfort zone, but to me, it was kind of like another opportunity to get out of my comfort zone and figure out what's next for Chuck. Yeah.
So that wasn't expected, but it just came about.
So I have a sister that's been my partner for years, and then her husband is also very involved with the business. And he and I ran those businesses, and he's about 10 years older and closer to that retirement age, if you will.
Sure.
And so that was one of the motivators. And it kind of evolved really, and then getting comfortable with it. And one thing you can't get back in life is time, right? And one thing that I haven't been very good about is spending time with my family, and this will certainly give me that opportunity.
No, that's awesome, man. I don't think there is a perfect time for anything, and Not really. I mean, you can't
For sure.
envision life without it because you lived in it for 20 years plus.
Absolutely. Probably my biggest, fear or, paranoia right now is just, what's my validity right now? The business was certainly my identity.
How much of that business would take your time each week? Like, I mean, it takes a full commitment of 300 people in rural markets. And
I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of school groups and talk about entrepreneurship. And, I would put up a cool little slideshow, and I said, I only think about business 2 times in a day and night. And so,
yeah,
it's so true. I mean, it's always on your mind. I had an office in one of my locations, and I probably spent 40, it used to be 60, 80 hours there, but I pared that back. But I started to work from home a little bit more towards the end, which was good for me. But, it's hard to define sometimes, right? It's always on your mind. And I got involved with a lot of nonprofits and groups that, was fun and definitely learning for me. So I was always super busy, and I'm still crazy busy. Everybody that says when you retire, you're always busy. I can attest to that.
You can vouch. Yeah. That's it really looks like though. I'm sure you were more involved, and then as you figured out how to run and operate these stores and put great people in place, you tried to replace yourself to back that down.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes get out of the way.
And okay,
I was good. I think really good about if I saw something in the store to go to the store director, let them do their job rather than interject and kind of take the feet out from underneath them.
Okay.
I heard the other day that the founder, I should say, former CEO of Fastenal had passed away, and I think he was in his 90s.
Okay.
And he had been, I think, out of the business for years, but I heard a little snippet on him, and he sounded like just kind of this average guy. I mean, I think there's over 3,000 stores that they owned.
Oh, wow.
Huge company, right? And so he sounded like, really relatable. He didn't sound like he was too full of himself. And he said, one of my greatest achievements was decentralizing decision-making, empowering my managers to do their job. And man, that resonated with me, because people that, are good, that want identity, they're going to migrate towards companies that allow them to spread their own wings and make decisions and make some mistakes. And, the sheep, if you will migrate towards places that have all, ready-made processes that you can't vary from.
Right. Yeah. Did you ever find, I always think like empowering people's wonderful, especially if they're learning, how did you easily keep accountability?
Good.
'Cause
I made the mistake many times of promoting them to positions of inadequacy too. I did that a fair amount. And sometimes people don't want to be promoted.
Oh, sure.
And I never thought that way, right? I always like, why wouldn't you want to take that next promotion and grow? I mean, that's the only way to think is my way. But I learned that, you have to be careful. So I had, I think, a really simple process of how I kind of manage my business. Obviously, sales are important and you need growth to survive. But, in my business, it came down to gross profit, managing labor. And you subtract that, and I used a term called CTO, contribution to overhead. So that paid, the bills that I needed to pay. And I had a number that I expected, and it was kind of different by department, by store.
Okay.
Each store was consistent, but within that parameter, you think of a grocery store, I compare it to a shopping mall. So you have your store with a store director, and then you have the deli department. That's the shoe store. You have your bakery department.
Okay.
That's the knick-knack store, whatever. So, and each department is responsible for its own P&L. So it was really fun that they could create their own team.
Sure.
They're accountable to their own sales, gross profit. And it was really, you could break that down and really empower people. And some of these departments had a couple staff. Some had, quite a few staff, up to 40, 50.
And then you would have, obviously there would be that leader of each area, and that's how you'd break it down. Yeah, because even these convenience stores there's all these little businesses going on within that business. It's
Absolutely.
not, it's not,
sure.
And I'm sure some make you more money than others, but they're necessary.
Absolutely. Yes. So they all had their own gross profit goals because they vary. In some departments, like a bakery, is very labor intensive. So
Sure.
it's almost everything they touch, they're producing. So you have to have different expectations for them.
Yep. Gotcha. That's that's interesting on how that works. But I think every business has I'm kind of even doing it. Like I have divisions within my construction company. The concrete operates different than the general contracting that's managing projects.
Absolutely. And it's their own specialties, right? I mean, I heard you say that earlier in one of your podcasts that, you have specialists in each, and if you treat it as a department, as its own kind of entity, you can create teams within that. Hopefully your culture all comes together at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But
We'll say there's clashing that goes on between departments, but I think that's normal in any world. And especially if you publicly display it within your teams to say how the teams did and who did a little better.
Yeah. One of our measurements in our business was your distribution. So, meaning when that customer came in, let's, for argument's sake, say they had a $100 bill, that the produce department needed to hit a goal of about 10% of that, so $10.
Okay.
So you think about that customer, and we all probably have a budget when you walk into a store, that how am I going to get as much of that dollar of that customer as I can? So produce is typically in the pole position in any supermarket. It's one of the first that you walk through.
Right.
And so they have the biggest opportunity, and the bakery gets to be towards the end many times, and they're complaining they don't have that first chance. So there's a lot of, we call it fun competition, but sometimes it gets a little more than that, especially when one is overachieving or hitting their goals.
Yeah. It is always interesting. Maybe speak to the marketing aspect of all these businesses, because you walk into a supermarket. I don't know. Here's what I do. Anytime I walk into a business, it could be a nice hotel, could be a nice restaurant, could be a nice, why would I rather go here than there? Even pulling up to a gas station, why would I go to this one and not that one? Or these grocery stores, why am I going to this one and not that one? But I think even the outside, the feel of everything is much different than it used to be, and competitive. But then even, how does those marketing departments in each department actually attain more of that dollar?
Yeah, that's a great question. Merchandising. Once we always use the term invite to the dance, and I coined that from one of my mentors. He said that you had to be really relevant on your front page of your ad. So that front page we always had an expectation that so much of our sales up to about 10% of our sales would come from the front page of our ad. So that's obviously, you're giving a lot of product away or very low margin on that.
Yep.
So you're getting them in the store with that hook, right? And then how you're merchandising, how you're kind of telling that consumer, what are they going to have for their week's worth of meals or whatever they're shopping for. I had a great guy in one of my service meat departments that would routinely tell the customer when they walk by, I'm going to tell you what you're going to have for dinner tonight. And that was his hook, right? And man, he did an awesome job, and he really created a lot of sales and rapport with that customer, right? Just it wasn't always about what he was going to sell them, but it was about, trust me, I'll tell you what we just made fresh back in the meat department, and and if you want a recommendation, I'll tell you, and I'll even tell you how to cook it.
Jeez, that's actually genius. Just to go in a little extra mile, just to
exactly. And I probably, in that case, he loved his job so much, you could tell. I mean, he was excited to come to work. I probably didn't need to pay him, but he just excelled, and it was a good example of someone that if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. I think that was him. Today we have Amazon, the big bad, I don't know, wolf.
Yeah.
They're out to have all of our lunches probably in some fashion, and it's a rare industry they haven't touched. And, convenience is, we used to think that carrying out groceries was a convenience, but now when the FedEx guys bring your groceries right to your doorstep, that can be hard to compete with. So back to that theater, what are you putting in that store that's attracting them? And, we always used fresh cut meat. We never use injected meat. So having a butcher and someone that cut meat was important to me. So that was a differentiator.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough 12, 13 years ago, I put a Caribou Coffee in Warroad.
Oh, okay.
Caribou I remember I called Starbucks. They said to me, Warroad has how many people? And no, thank you. and I called Dunn Brothers. They never called me back. Caribou took my call, and they said, "Are you really think this would work in your town?" And I said, "Yes." And it was my investment, right? So it wasn't them, and they were going to still take my franchise fee. And I remember I went down to Minneapolis, their headquarters, and they were telling me, we really would advise against this, but I think they were also intrigued to see what it could do in a market that size. I could obviously be good for them. And long story short, it was wildly successful. And I got a call from their franchise owner one day, or their franchise manager for new accounts. And Leva Wolf said to me, "Chuck, we've never had more leads since you put that in Warroad, Minnesota, because there's so many towns that size or even larger that didn't have them in." And for us, it was a way, we took a video department, video's not real popular today, rental. And I doubled down. Actually, I put a little coffee shop. I did it myself, and it was a failure.
Okay.
So then I doubled down and put $500,000 into a Caribou Coffee.
Right.
Fit and finish was gorgeous. I mean, I really put a lot into this.
Yes.
Copper roof, beautiful tile, and a fireplace. And it just had a nice feel. I actually had a real caribou mounted on the mantle.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the day before we opened, I was so nervous, and I already was thinking contingency plans. And I think that's part of being an entrepreneur too, right? Is what are you going to do when this doesn't work, Chuck?
Oh, yeah.
I was so nervous, and I remember I walked into that place, and it was just lines of people. And, Caribou was shocked, and they were like, what's going on here? And I said, well, this is one of the only franchises we have in this community. This is like a big city,
right?
Opportunity or big city feel in a small town, and it ended up being, wildly successful. So I put it in one of my even smaller stores after that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, that's actually a great story.
So that's something, selling brown water is an experience, and you can't really get that from Amazon. So I gave my customers a reason to come in the store, and then also gave them a really nice environment when they came in. Yeah.
And this was actually like inside the store, part of the store, maybe a drive-through or something, or
I didn't have a drive-through.
Or no drive-through. Okay.
In my second one, I did, because I had an outside wall to work with, and
sure,
obviously drive-throughs are a big deal. And kind of, yes and no. Back to the whole convenience store, you still want them to stop in. And, the best thing I can do is get a drink in the customer's hand while they're taking a few extra minutes to shop, because they don't have a lot of time, but if they're relaxed and enjoying that experience, they'll probably buy another couple items.
Yeah. They're getting all hyped up on caffeine and want to build all these crazy dinners.
And we always like customers to shop hungry.
Oh, yes. Always go hungry. I think there was something, I seen a statistic on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm guilty of that, actually. That's probably why my wife doesn't let me shop. And I'm always the guy buying all the random stuff.
And we love male shoppers, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Especially hunters.
Hunters. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We got to try the new barbecue sauce. We got to get these weird seasonings that we probably won't use much, or our wives won't use much.
The sky's the limit for hunting camps. We learned, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm your profit margin for sure. And probably why my wife tells me not to go.
Right.
So what's one of your hardest challenges of building in rural? I'm sure your parents had plenty of challenges, because they were like ground up. Maybe talk us a little bit through that beginning. You got this new loan payment from your parents that you acquired.
Well, not through my parents; they co-signed. Fear, that was a motivator, and my parents retained the real estate, so that was part of their retirement plan on a strong triple net lease, and in their favor. And
sure.
And so I didn't want to fail for my parents' retirement either, right?
Right. Yeah.
They
wow.
were relying
what a burden.
on a nice income from that rental, plus the proceeds from, the sale. And, I was certainly on the hook for it, but the bank, they were also on the hook with it by co-signing, right? And obviously the rent payment was contingent on me being able to pay my bills. So that wasn't, I woke up every morning with a little healthy paranoia of who was going to take me out. So back to being relevant, and in a small community, you're a little bit of something to everyone. There was 2 stores in Warroad at one point, and then through kind of building a new store and then expanding that, we became the only store in town. And I used that older store. I actually bought that property, and that's where I put my dollar store.
Oh, okay.
And I put a number of groceries in that as well, but it's always like, people have to eat. And as much as I hated that term, like, oh, you're in such an easy business. Well, that's true. But when you look at it, even in a town like Warroad with Dollar General and the hardware stores, everybody's selling food, and Amazon, and we all make trips to Grand Forks, right? And so we have access to a lot of food, even though you might not have that competitor right next door. But I think one of my successes was always treating like I had that big bad wolf on my shoulder, and who's going to take you out? And, healthy paranoia, waking up with a healthy paranoia doesn't maybe sound healthy, but I think there's that balance, right? I mean, it's very true. You can't be just lackadaisical.
Right.
And you can't be ultra paranoid because it'll paralyze you.
Right.
And so there's a balance in there. And I think good entrepreneurs, they balance that as best they can, because I think we're all a little bit self-conscious and worried about what other people think of us, or are we going to succeed? We have all these loans and this risk we've taken on, and sometimes we act confident, but deep down there's a lot of fear.
Yeah, keeps the chip on our shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, trying to keep that healthy and balanced, and for me, being married to a mental health therapist was probably good. She would ask me about
she didn't charge you, did she?
No. Well, yes. Yeah. Yes and no.
she's buying a new car, and it's the grocery store's expense now.
I'm charged her. She married me, so earlier before we started, I said she's often said that I'm her greatest failure as a patient.
Oh, jeez. Well, it's and she's no part of the business. She never was.
Yeah, she was.
Oh, she was. Okay.
Yeah. When we met, she was living in a cool little community around Bayfield, Wisconsin, if you know where that is. Really beautiful, and off the Apostle Islands. And I attracted her to Warroad, and she was a social worker, and she came to work at a little supermarket. And she became our HR person, right?
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, and this was a good lesson for both of us. We didn't work well together. We had just moved in. We weren't married yet. We were engaged, so we just kind of and then we're working together, right? We threw the kitchen sink at it, but we respected each other immensely, and which continues today. I couldn't do what I do without her, but we weren't probably the most work compatible, which wasn't bad, right? You just figure things out. But, interestingly, you talk about staff. So my wife's a social worker, and she thought, oh, what an opportunity to hire these people that just need a chance, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so she was able to give some of those people a chance, but she realized quickly that some people, you can give them a lot of chances, but they still make bad choices.
Yeah. You can't change them all.
You can't, right. And so it was learning for both of us, I would say. And it was funny. She went to get her master's degree. I'm going off on a little different subject right now.
Yeah.
But her professor, first day of her master's degree, said to her, the problem with our, society, social problems in our society, our minimum wage is too low. And my wife immediately raised her hand and said, my family, my fiance and her family have a small business. And she goes, I'll beg to differ, because A, you don't keep an employee if you pay them minimum wage if they're any good. And B, if they show up for work, do basic things, they're going to continue to rise. And minimum wage it's more of the bad choices they make.
Yeah.
The problems.
I would vouch for that. Mm-hmm. With concrete workers, we can find, we give a lot of chances. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We even wait a few years and may give another chance.
Probably too many chances.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yep. Some will fully convert we figured age is probably the best thing. A little more responsibility, and then comes better work ethics and
a couple dings,
consistency.
Yes.
Yeah. You kind of have to get it on track at some point. But did you own the business then when you met her?
No.
You were still working parents?
Still working for my parents.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
And then you said, "Hey, let's go back to
my wife,
Warroad."
I think the deal was we'd live in Warroad for 1 year, and obviously I'm a great salesperson.
Yeah. You got a good pitch.
And so within a few years, we ended up having a child, and then buying the store.
Buying the store,
right?
Wow. Was there a motive, like I always think like when I should have taken over my dad's construction company, we butt heads. It didn't work because I wanted to grow it. He wanted to keep it the same and, just older school ways and didn't want me to wreck it. And I wanted to grow something because apparently I was an entrepreneur. I didn't know at that time.
Sure.
You don't know until you're kind of told that you're like, what are you doing here? So I was just curious when you took over and, I don't know if they tossed the wand to you before you even bought it and they're like, we're going to trust Chuck to build this, or was it?
My parents, they were fairly young. They were had basically 60 years old. And I was to the point where my father and I were very similar and different. Okay. And we butted heads a lot and never negative. I think we both respected each other a lot. And I would argue that my father was by far a better single store operator than I ever could be. He was way more detailed. And looking at his garage compared to mine, that's still very true.
That's good.
But we complement each other well. And I always wanted that opportunity. I just knew that. And I would have never had a problem if my parents would have said, we're going to ride this out until we are in our grave. And so I always knew that at some point, should or get off the pot, I was going to be looking at a store, but lucky for me, my parents decided to retire early and give me that opportunity.
Right.
So that's really how it worked for me. And then I had a mentor that he always recognized that I had the capability, and he encouraged me to own more than one store, and obviously one store to two and two to three, it's big, right? And it changes. You turn from a business to kind of a company.
Yeah.
And I think a term that I like to use, especially being on some boards, is arms around, fingers out. And sometimes, even though you're the owner and you can put your fingers in, maybe you shouldn't. So, direct the people, get qualified people, and let them do their job, and try to manage from above and not hover too much.
Was your dad like that at all, or was your dad fingers on?
He was very fingers on.
Yeah, my dad too. So I was just asking, just because that's maybe that generation.
He wasn't wrong, right? I mean, and obviously it was his. So, but I think with some people that would maybe scare them away, right?
Yeah. Your dad couldn't fathom two store. It would be very.
I think that would have been hard for him. As good as he was, I think it would have been hard for him. He was very intolerant of imperfection, right?
Oh.
Like, why wouldn't they work as hard as him?
It was
kind of that mentality. And he wasn't wrong.
We don't know. Yeah, no.
But people aren't all wired that way, right?
No, yeah. I think when you move from one to two, probably the hardest ever, because my dad, your dad would understand that's twice the problems, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what they see.
Twice the time. And
to
do it right.
To do it their way and with those same skills. But then I think when you go from one to two, that you're buying back your time at some point, because you've figured out how to manage and entitle people to make better, give them opportunity to run the business for you.
Absolutely.
And if you would have some passed away during these, that your wife could have been like, well, there's still worth something. They still can operate. Your wife doesn't know what you did every day. I'm sure you guys talked about it.
Right. Yeah.
Through it. But I mean, you had a real business at the end of the day.
Yeah. And back to being married to a mental health therapist, I think my wife did a good job of keeping me in check and saying, I always knew that if I complained too much, she'd say, then why don't you change it, right? So I was careful not to complain.
That's something to change.
For sure. And I think I balanced things well. I remember one time an employee came up to me and just was like concerned for me, and like I don't know how you do it, how you have to think about all these things. And by the time I got done talking to them, I was concerned, like, holy shit, maybe I should be worried about more of these things.
You actually, open the door to a lot of things I don't think about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can worry about a lot of things.
Oh man.
And there's a good phrase of don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Back to empowering people to do those things,
right?
Do those jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to be making $12 decisions. Probably like our dads were, at times.
Absolutely.
It's
That's a wonderful, analogy or phrase. Yes. Making $12 decisions or sometimes $1 ones.
Right. Yeah. I want to know every dollar that gets spent if we're upgrading something. It's like, if you're going to spend $50, just do it, or $100, whatever that threshold is for you, give them, even if it's a bad $200 decision, it's like, at least they did it and they didn't even talk to you about it.
If you can learn from a mistake, I always told people, once is a mistake, twice is stupidity. But also, if I ever had someone that told me they never made a mistake, either they were lying or they didn't do anything. So I'm not sure which one it was, but it was one of the two.
Right. Probably. Did you, like when your dad was operating the business, your parents, I guess, was the culture the same as you think it is? Kind of the same roots, or is it much different?
Probably, I think culture is always, it's live, right? It's evolving.
Yeah.
I would say it changed, but it was very subtle. And each of my stores probably had a little bit of their own unique culture.
Oh, okay.
To some extent. I had the opportunity once. When I bought my second store, I had a lot of hard competition and I lost a lot of sales. It was just a lot of factors, and I was like, ooh, this was a scary time, and my bank was even concerned. And I think any entrepreneur that, if they're truthful, will probably tell you one of the reasons they're as good as they are is when they learned a lot from a hard time, right? When you go through those, you get strong. Anyway, I had taken my managers, like the store directors and those department managers I was referencing, with my two stores that I had at the time, and we went to a 1-year seminar once a month for 12 months. And there's a lot of follow-up. So it's one thing to go to a seminar and get a couple takeaways, but there's a lot of follow-up with this. It was wonderfully done, and a lot of basic things, and we came up with terms like purgatory in a grocery store, which is when you're waiting to get checked out. You're waiting in line. We call it grocery purgatory. For any Catholic out there, they'll understand. And so we stationed a person. You know how the cashier will always ask, did you find everything? Yeah. And it's almost in jest, and God forbid you say something because the person behind you is going to scowl at you, right? So we would station someone, this came out of the seminar, right, where that person would go with notepad and say, I know you're waiting in line. Is there something that I can help you get that you may have forgot? And we'd make them record that. And within an hour or two, we always did it during prime time, like, right after work. Yeah. Thousands of dollars of additional sales that I'll guarantee those customers would have never went back for, because, grocery stores are big. It's a long walk to go back and get that gallon of milk. Right. So little things like that matter. And I think the customers were dumbfounded when we did it. Most bakeries will do their baking in the morning early. Sure. Get it ready for the day. We did an afternoon bake with things like French bread. And then we'd take that baker and with their bakery cart on wheels, cut up some with warm, nothing better than, fresh bread with butter on it, and sample that. And we'd sell dozens of extra loaves of French bread. Right. Yeah. And it was back to theater. Right. And I think the customer felt good about it. Yeah. Jeez. That's awesome. Basic, right? Yeah. Right. Real basic. Yeah. These aren't over the top things. I go into the grocery, and I'm not in the grocery store very often. My wife would tell me that, but I walk around aimlessly through these aisles sometimes looking for Clamato juice. Sure. or where is something that you wouldn't think of? I don't know where the peanut butter is. I don't know. You know what I mean? So but I wish I had that guy, in the aisle. So that would be another key one. Yeah. We would walk, that was back to this takeaway. I think we did a pretty good job, but instead of saying, how are you doing today? We rephrased it to, what can I help you with today? And those customers, I grew up in a grocery store, right? Literally. Yeah. I started saying that to my customers instead of, hey, Mrs. Smith, how are you doing today? I said, hey, Miss Smith, what can I do for you today? And it was crazy how many times she said, I'm looking for this, right? The Clamato juice. So and then it was our policy to take them to that item. It makes trying harder, right? Yeah, I'm in there 20 extra minutes. I want to be in and out, because otherwise I'll buy a bunch of things, which maybe is the case. Maybe you do hide things. I don't know. Maybe there's part of the marketing tactic. we don't do this, but we get blamed for it often of always moving things.
I gotcha. That's all by tactic. Yeah. It's all about sales, but that's another.
It's a basic business, right? And I was told at a seminar years ago that when I was really, really little, I don't remember it, but anybody in the grocery business, we were too little to remember. We were segregated into a room and said, you can all be in the grocery business and the rest of the kids get to do some other cooler thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's how I got into the grocery business.
Oh my gosh. That's funny. So would you say the grocery store business, obviously your primary, is it one of your favorite types of investments that you've made, or?
Yeah, it's something I knew,
yeah,
obviously.
Right.
And comfortable with, I
right.
suppose. Yes. And all the things that go with it, frustrating and, employee intensive, dealing with that. So the highs and lows of it, but it was what I knew. And, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And I figured that. So you're exited, you're doing insane bicycling.
That was always,
tell me about, what's your hobbies? Cause you're in this part of your life, exited within a year or a couple of years, less than a year. So
fall.
Now
you're very fresh.
So you're still who you are,
and
want to build things and do things. And you've taken up bicycling, family events, tell me a little bit.
To slow down. I've always cycled.
Okay.
That's been important to me. It was kind of my yin to my yang, if you will.
Yeah.
It was a good release. And then being an entrepreneur that's never satisfied, I started doing longer rides, which turned into ultra rides, which turned into, there's a race in northern Minnesota considered one of the 10 toughest races in the world called the Arrowhead Ultra. And I think currently I'm the person that's finished it the most. And,
oh, wow.
It's very hard. A lot of different movies and documentaries have been done on this race. So
okay.
Kind of, it's turned into kind of my identity also, right?
Yeah.
The other part of me, if you will. And it's such a nice break for me because when I'm competing, if it's 20 below or I'm out on a ride and, I almost have to just be solely focused on that. So it was a wonderful release to kind of take my mind in a healthy way off of work and things that were going on there.
Wow. So would you throw AirPods in or nothing?
Yeah,
or would you avoid all that? And
batteries don't last long when it's 20 below. So
I'm trying
once
to
in a
think.
while I'd be concerned
how much
about
gear do you got to have on?
Yeah, a lot of gear. Right. And that was part of the fun though. I mean, figuring that out, right? My wife calls me a gear slut. So
you got all the top of the line stuff now.
Yep.
You're not getting cold out there.
Exactly.
Well, unless something happens to the bike, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. It's crazy what you can spend on some of these little trinkets.
Yeah. We were talking about how they produce energy with the wheel and
a German-made hub. So what your spokes tie into the center of your wheel can be well over $1,000.
Jeez, just to produce a little bit of voltage just to keep you charged up.
Right. Yeah.
I always think even running outside, I see some people, it'll be blizzarding and whatever, and there they go by with their little light on.
Once the furnace gets going, it's amazing how your body will generate heat, and it works. I probably in my culmination of the crazy or the most scared I've been, I did the Iditarod once on my bicycle and up in Alaska a week before the sled dogs leave, and the year I did it. So this particular race, they call it the Iditarod Trail Invitational, same course that the sled dogs are on. And,
oh, really?
And the race is they only allow 70 people in it. It's an invitational, meaning you have to get invited. You have to have a resume, so you put an application, and I was lucky enough to get invited.
Wow.
Say that tongue in cheek, like lucky, but I choose to do this, right?
Yeah, right.
Anyway, I think the year I did it, 2017, there was 18 countries represented. So that is by far one of the toughest endurance races, and typically about 80-90% of the people will finish just because it's hard to get out of that race. I mean, you have to get to a check station and nobody's ever going to come rescue you. You have to find a check station, and then you have to probably charter a plane or a helicopter to get out of there, which is very expensive in the bush and when it's that cold and et cetera, et cetera. So well over 90% will finish that race. And the year I did it, I think it was 20% finished.
Oh my gosh.
I was one of the few and a rookie, and I finished, and it was borderline traumatic. It was 55 below at one point when I pushed my bike. One day I pushed my bike for 19 hours and I made like 17 miles. And
Because you couldn't ride it?
couldn't ride it, post holing through deep snow and just bitter. It was 55 below, and I think there was about a 50 mile an hour wind. So, 100 some below wind chill. Sleeping outside. I mean, it's scary, right? I mean, I frostbit all my fingers, and you didn't, I was a little concerned if I'd, make it out of that, but I did.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a few family members concerned about you out there.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I told my wife I'd finish that race. I did the 350 version, which as a rookie, that's all you're allowed. And that year they didn't let the sled dogs take the rain. They had to do a different route because they thought it was too dangerous. And a few people had died on Rainy Pass. So we took the traditional route. We're top. We're smart.
You don't quite have cell phone signal everywhere, and it's very quiet at night.
Yes, it is. And so I told my wife I'll finish in 3.5 days. I was pretty cocky. And so she flew into Anchorage, and after 6.5 days, I hadn't finished. And I finished. I got to make one satellite phone call. It's like, when you're in jail or something, you get to make one call. And I called my wife, and she was in Anchorage for a few days and looking at the carnage coming in. And there was one Polish guy that his fingers were so frostbit, they wouldn't touch each other. They were all blistered.
Oh my gosh.
His nose was black. He had lost a lot of his face from that. But so she had saw that and experienced, these racers that didn't finish and the carnage from it. And so anyway, I call her and I said, I finished. And she said, how was it? And she said, don't answer that. I already know. It was kind of an emotional conversation, and, but, very proud to finish it. And, I would say, from that side of my life, it's totally different. Running a business, being supported by a lot of people, and relying on a lot of people. But also it sets me up for success because you are alone as an entrepreneur sometimes. You're concerned about that, and it's almost like, well, if I can run this business, I can physically push through this, right?
Right.
So
your life's on the line on these bike rides. I mean, literally.
Yeah, and that part too. I mean, I'm gonna show up to my kid's graduation, right? So it's not an option. I'm gonna get to the finish line.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's like, well, in a business, it's like. We had an interview before here. It's like the biggest there's always a problem every day. It's just, you're going to wake up, you're going to have some kind of a problem to find a solution or have others bring you solutions and help them identify one that works. And, you just got to knowing that, but it's like, in these bike races, it's like, you got risk of life and wanting to finish, because when you're halfway through, I'd imagine this is like Mount Everest. You don't want to climb half of it, and no one remembers those people.
Absolutely, exactly.
But yet half of them die from there on the way up, and then not half. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
There's people who do.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to be. And you don't want to see the peak, I'm sure, and not climb the rest, even if you're at harm.
Right.
So adrenaline must pump through, and
and stubbornness. Entrepreneurs, I think, all have a little bit of that. So tenacity, and honestly, in an endurance sport, age is on your side, because the young guys, they want to finish. They want to do that last mile on their first mile, and they're all gung ho, and quickly they don't have the mental capacity to probably push through. And if you've lived long enough, you've probably been through a few things in your life and had a few knocks that sets you up for some success in an endurance event.
I'm much of a you're speaking opposite of me. I'm a sprinter, and then wait 5 minutes and then I'll sprint again.
Tortoise in the hair, right?
The tortoise is going to kick me every time on that long. I'm not doing cross country or long bike rides. I think the hardest thing, I bought a bike when I did 75 hard. It's a challenge where you don't drink, you drink a gallon of water. It's basically it's 75 days long though. That's long enough to make a habit. And you have to work out 45 minutes twice a day inside you can, and then 45 minutes outside. Well, I don't work out outside.
Right.
I usually come home and try to unwind.
Sure.
And so I bought a bike, and I mean, I remember I started at April 1st to June 14th, which is my birthday. It ended. So I was like, dang, this will be nice. But then April, I don't know what was with that year. I had a helmet on because the wind was freaking blowing in my face. I don't know what people were thinking of me when I was strolling past their house in Thompson, and but I made it through. And a lot of people die around, stop doing the challenge around 50 days.
And it's 75, you said?
It's 75. So like, there you go again with the entrepreneurs. That last leg is what I pushed through, and I learned a lot of good habits from that. And,
absolutely, good for you.
And but that's just how entrepreneurs, I think, are built on. I just didn't want to quit. There's many people. Everyone I started, the 15 people I started with, all quit around day 30 to 50.
I run this business. I can do this.
Challenge, right? Yep. And try to document it. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
But that's as long as I've had that kind of discipline. I couldn't imagine going 6 days straight in a bike race. I don't know where you are mentally, probably broken down by the end of that.
Bit, yeah.
I mean, it's you need your wife just for the mental therapy.
100%.
I don't know what I'm doing. What's one of your biggest fears?
Relevance, a little bit. Being relevant. I'm faced with that now. For most of my life, being involved with the grocery business and then owning stores and having that community, not just my own staff members, but also those that, supported me, my suppliers, going to trade shows, just that family, if you will. And now not having that, it's a little bit about, my own relevance. So that's probably one of my fears today.
No, that's great. I think being relevant and present is always the challenge of after life with business ownership.
For sure. Yeah.
So you're in it.
It's never ending, right? So it's, in some ways, it's my newest challenge, right? Of, what's the next chapter for
right.
Chuck, right?
Yeah. No, I love it. What doesn't follow the herd mean to you?
I think being true to yourself, being authentic. I had a friend that had seen a therapist and he was going through some tough times, and I'd call him just to make sure things are going well. And he said something really impactful once, and it was, people want to be around interesting people. And he said, I feel like I kind of lost my purpose and my way. So he quickly started getting involved with things that were, things he wanted to do. And he was kind of an anomaly. He liked to do snowmobile racing, so he did the I-500, they call it, that cross country. But he was also a runner, right? So, probably not your typical, mix of hobbies, if you will. I'm a big cyclist, but I love to upland hunt and even do some guiding on upland hunting. Maybe not your traditional cyclist. Right? But that's who I am. Yep. And I'm not doing it. I'm not trying to pose, and not that I don't have maybe role models in that, but I try to look at role models of people that are authentic, and I can learn something from them, but I can't be them. And so to me, unfollow the herd is, we're all unique. We all have a unique fingerprint. So how does that translate to who we are? And it's not always reinventing the wheel, but maybe tweaking it a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's well put. And we all have this uniqueness that not everyone's willing to commit and to actually act upon those. For sure. Which can be, rather scary for some, and for us, I guess, more of a normal. We find that being normal.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. You don't want to run the company one day, or what I mean, or replace me.
Exactly.
I feel like we could talk for another hour. But I'm in a rural market. We're in North Dakota. I know you grew up in South Dakota, Minnesota, and you grew businesses in rural markets. I think there's lots of small businesses all over the U.S. that struggle in these small markets. How do you find the theater? Some of the things that you pulled up are you could help a lot of businesses. I feel if someone's going to reach out to you, how do they find you? What's the best way?
My email, clindner, and that's CLINDNER @Wiktel, WIKTEL.com. And I'd certainly take a phone call. My mobile number is 218-242-0315. I think one of the things I really enjoy today is giving back, being on some of the nonprofit boards, and then talking to young entrepreneurs, and don't overcomplicate it. That's one of my things. Have things that you can measure, especially in business, but again, make those goals achievable, but also stretch you a little bit, and then keep accountability. If you have these complicated goals or measurements, rarely they just don't get measured then,
right,
because they're too complex. It's really kind of simple what I do, and you probably would say the same. And if I'm doing it, a lot of other people can do it.
Yeah.
So let's try to treat it that way. At the end of the day, it's not. My father would always say, "This isn't brain surgery, Chuck."
Amen. Yeah, the neurologist out there, it's like, we're not doing that.
Ironically, my daughter, she's quite smart and probably can relate more to a brain surgeon than a carry-out like me. But
yeah,
I would say, at the end of the day, what motivates customers, and I'm huge proponent of looking internally. That's not always easy to do, but look at, what are you going to do to be better and more relevant to the customer, attract customers, everything that goes into it, right? Rather than, oh, woe is me, and it's the market environment, or it's this, company, they have so many more resources. Yeah, they do. And they're going to. So get over it.
Right.
Or go work for them if they're not great. Maybe you can excel with them. But there's opportunities out there. Yeah. And there will continue to be opportunities out there. I listen to, there's some grocers I get to go to, or used to get to go to a great environment where grocers from all over the nation would come, and we'd get a few days of really some R&R with a few business meetings. And I can't remember what country these two brothers were from, but they worried about in their country whether or not they were going to wake up to a home that was bombed or not. Oh my gosh. And they came from nothing. And then what they did have, if they ever got anything, the government would take it, or, corrupt police would take it. That's what they grew up with. Wow. They came in, and these two brothers are killing it. They'll grow beyond probably my wildest imagination. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, it's America. Everybody has that chance. And I'm like, all of our young people need to hear that. When you're born in America, you won a lottery ticket. Mm-hmm. Now it's what you're going to do with that ticket. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of entitlement, and you hear people that, think we should be given more, but man, that isn't the answer. I'm most proud of not borrowing money from my parents or giving the store, right? Just doing it on my own. They gave me the chance, and I wouldn't be here talking to you today probably without that chance. Yep. So, but I also took that chance, and I grew with it. Right. And I will take credit for that. But, we all have this opportunity. Oh, yeah. My grades didn't reflect some genius that you're sitting next to.
I tell everyone I'm just a concrete guy, because that's all I was too. So it's like,
I'm a carry out.
Yeah. I smooth and smooth concrete out and broom it and then move on. Mm-hmm. Well, Chuck, I sure appreciate it. You have his phone number. Yes. You have his email.
Absolutely.
And if you're in a small business, rural market, you need a competitive advantage, maybe give him a call and just, he's willing to help. He's hired mentors himself. He has mentors around him. He's educating himself probably even today about how to be better in that business. And so I think whether it's the markets, meaning grocery stores or convenience or wherever it is, I'm sure he could provide some value for you and try to help you with the dynamics of hiring and the challenges of growing the business and the willingness to be a little different and unique and try to, create that theater. And every small business needs it. Otherwise you don't grow and you don't stand out.
Absolutely.
So Chuck, I appreciate you having you on, man.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I appreciate it.